Greetings. Keith Prather here with the NCM RV Economic Outlook. This one's specifically for February. So I'm sharing my screen already, and you can see the RV demand index this month. It was a little bit lower month over month between December and January, which was not unexpected. We had some favorable weather conditions in December. We had some other items like dealer incentives and some things that really pushed demand a little bit higher toward the end of the year, but it was only slightly higher. You can see that. And then in January, saw a little bit of a dip. And the good news is that year over year, it was up 5.2% versus January of 2024. And so we did see some momentum being built, and you can kind of see over the last several years, once we got off the peak that we hit just coming out of the pandemic, a lot of the lockdown period, we know that there was a big, heavy RV sales demand era. Then we had the deceleration into that trough that we hit early in 2023, and then we've been slowly climbing back out. We're not back up to the normal trend line, but over time, this trend line is going to flatten out. And so we will be approaching what right now is probably more of a normal environment. If you look at the current index at 120.2, it is very similar to where it was prior to the pandemic and during the period that we had in the decade before the pandemic. So this is more of a normal environment, and we wouldn't expect growth rates to suddenly surge or maybe to move up faster than expected. Here we go. So RV sales, then when we look at a different measure, and this is the producer price index, and the producer price index has a little bit of dealer costs involved. So you see dealer costs rise. Sometimes that can affect the producer price index. But this is a good gauge of supply and demand in the industry and what is really kind of happening with the overall trajectory of the industry. And what we see is similar to the RV demand index that we showed you the slide before. We're a little bit below trend still, but it was 1.3% higher month over month. So we saw a little bit of improvement in January in this measure. And then it was sharply higher year over year. Now it's going up against a fairly bad trough in January 2024. So it's, against those easy comparisons, it's pretty easy for it to be up overall. So one of the themes that I'm using in this particular month, looking overall at the macro economy, is this transition that we're in right now. And I think it affects every dealer, every aspect of the economy. So when we look at Q4 of last year, just to tell the story and to help understand it, consumer spending was about 81%, almost 82% of GDP. That's a little bit hotter than normal. Normally, we'll see a consumer spending component that's somewhere around 72 to 73% of GDP in Q4 during the typical busy holiday retail season. But what the problem is in this particular cycle and coming out of the last 4 years is that government spending has surged to almost 18% of GDP. So the objective under the Trump administration, as we all know, is to try and transition and get out of this heavy government spending, but to move it down into areas like non-residential fixed investment. So this is like, capital investment by corporations in new structures, buildings, construction, building out automation, robotics, all of those things that create jobs, drive manufacturing, drive construction spending, and ultimately drive everything from RV sales to some of the other big power sports equipment that we watch. Non-residential is also one area that they're shifting it to. But what we're going through economically is that transition period, right? Where we're stopping the government spending part of it under the DOGE program, and we're transitioning that spending down into these areas. So they're creating incentives for private industry, private corporations to pick up the balance and to start building momentum, to start hiring, to start investing, and to start spending. And we don't see those, what we call animal spirits in economics yet. You don't see that transition happening. So we see the cutting here, but we're not seeing it grow down here yet. And so we're getting a little bit of this odd economic malaise. It's actually slowing growth just a little bit in the near term. Now, the Trump administration's only been on board for 35 days, I think, at the time of recording. So they're just building momentum, and it's a little bit of chaos theory. They're going in and they're blowing things up as they try to create this new direction that they're hoping for. And so It will take some time, and what we're watching is just that transition period and what happens to consumers, what happens to that critical, Gen Z population that now is starting to really get into RVing and camping out and being in the outdoors, and what happens to their spending potential. Now for Q1, we already see GDP running about 2.3%. That's what the blue chip estimates are also seeing. For comparison, we ran about 1.3% in 2024, so we're ahead of schedule still, but it's a fairly average growth rate for any given quarter. So a couple other things to note this month is that purchase intent among Gen Z buyers, those buyers who already have an RV, 84% of Gen Z expect to buy a brand new one over the next 5 years. And that's pretty promising. About 68% of baby boomers also believe that they're going to do the same thing. So that shows a pretty good market opportunity, I think, overall for the industry. Now, 41% of brand new buyers, those who don't own an RV today, are what we call value buyers, right? They're looking for units under 25 feet long. A lot of them are coming out of heavy, dense metropolitan areas, and it's essentially the whole escape theme, right? They want to get out of their daily hustle and bustle and get out into the woods, get out, to camping and to doing the outdoor thing. So that will continue to be a trend. So again, they're looking for units that they can tuck into a garage, units that they can, put into a pretty easy to rent parking space. So again, under 25 feet long, most of them are pull behinds, and they're Gen Z buyers and they're metropolitan, so they like to have a lot of the creature comforts that they can kind of pack into that. In the briefing, if you read the briefing, we put some notes in there about some of the new automation and the ability for a pull behind to be moved electrically and set, and everything in the pull behind, the extensions and everything in it, to be really highly mechanized and electronic, and really adaptive to kind of a new type of buyer who's used to everything being really automated. So this year for RVs, we see a lot of forecasts out there, but most of them, based on a lot of the market dynamics that we see, are showing potential for almost 9% growth, maybe up to about 9.5% growth this year. So that's a strong growth rate after a year that was kind of lackluster in 2024. So we'll see. It's a little bit of hopium, but maybe that's not bad. And the key will be the 10-year Treasury rate, and I'll have this across all the videos. It's a key theme. A lot of long-term borrowing is going to be tied to the 10-year Treasury, which is not necessarily tied to what the Federal Reserve has been doing. So when the Federal Reserve comes out in their big meetings and they reduce interest rates, that's typically affecting short-term borrowing. And what we really need to watch, especially for RVs, is what's happening with the 10-year Treasury rate. Now, the good thing is that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent believes that he can get it down by the summer, and it's one of his key focuses. He knows that this is going to be the trigger to improving the housing market, construction of all types, and then things like these big ticket purchase items like RVs, boats, anything that has longer term borrowing attached to it. So we see some movement already in the 10-year, and there's a lot of different things that he will do to try and get the 10-year Treasury rate down, taming inflation, getting the government spending down so that it looks like we're trimming the deficit. Those are the types of things that can actually help the 10-year Treasury come down. So we're still watching for that, and just know that that's going to be a key focus for this administration. So moving forward, just got some summary data here. So last year, GDP ran about 2.7%. If you listen again to Scott Bessent, who I just talked about, he believes 3% growth for 2025 is possible. The Federal Reserve, which is what we're showing here, their forecast shows just 2.1% for 2025. They believe that transition year between the Trump administration's, focus on trimming government spending and moving it down into the private sector is going to be a little more painful than expected. So they're a little less excited about what's going on. Unemployment rate is expected to inch up a little bit. We know that about 250,000 government workers are going to be trimmed, and that's going to push the unemployment rate up just a little bit. But inflation is still remaining around 2.5% this year. Not much of a change as impact of tariffs, but by 26, 27 and beyond, that rate comes down. So Fed funds rate, we think the Federal Reserve is going to trim by another 50 basis points this year, which will help a little bit. But again, that's short-term borrowing. The longer term rate that we're really looking for is a treasury yield, and we want to see that come down, and that will really help with overall sales. Okay, so I appreciate everybody. Reach out if you have any questions, and until next month, we'll see you then. All right, take care. Bye bye.